Hi, and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. My name is Marcus, and I need to tell you about the moment my entire world collapsed. Not once, but twice. The first time was when my wife got cancer. The second time was when she recovered. I met Celeste when we were both 28, working at competing marketing firms in downtown Portland. She was this incredible force of nature. Auburn hair that caught sunlight like fire, green eyes that could read you in seconds, and this laugh that made everyone in the room turn around just to hear it again. She was brilliant, ambitious, and had this way of making you feel like you were the only person who mattered when she looked at you. Our courtship was like something out of a romantic movie. Late nights in coffee shops debating campaign strategies, weekend hiking trips through the Columbia River Gorge, stolen kisses in elevators between client meetings. She challenged me intellectually, supported my dreams, and somehow made me want to be better than I ever thought I could be. We married 3 years later in her parents' backyard in Salem. Small ceremony, just close family and friends. I remember standing at that makeshift altar, watching her walk toward me in her grandmother's vintage dress, thinking I was the luckiest bastard alive. She whispered, "Forever," when she slipped the ring on my finger, and I believed it with every fiber of my being. The early years were golden. We bought a craftsman house in the Hawthorne district, adopted a rescue dog named Pilot, and fell into this comfortable rhythm of shared dreams and inside jokes. Celeste got promoted to creative director at her firm. I started my own consulting business, working out of the converted garage. Sunday mornings meant pancakes and crossword puzzles in bed. Friday nights were sacred. No work, just us, wine, and whatever terrible movie we could find streaming. By 35, we were talking seriously about kids. Celeste had this whole timeline mapped out. She wanted to make senior partner first, then we'd start trying. She was always planning, always thinking 3 steps ahead. I loved that about her, how she could see the future we were building together like a roadmap only she could read. Then came that Tuesday in March when everything changed. I was in Seattle for a client presentation when my phone rang. It was Celeste, but her voice sounded different, smaller somehow. She'd found a lump during her monthly self-exam. Just like that, our carefully planned future shifted into uncertainty. The mammogram led to an ultrasound, the ultrasound to a biopsy, the biopsy to the words that still echo in my head. Invasive ductal carcinoma, stage 3, aggressive growth pattern, immediate treatment recommended. I drove home from Seattle in a daze, breaking every speed limit between there and Portland. When I walked through our front door, Celeste was sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of medical pamphlets spread in front of her, Pilot's head in her lap. She looked up at me with those green eyes I'd fallen in love with, now red-rimmed and scared, and said she was sorry. Sorry, like getting cancer was somehow her fault. The next few weeks were a blur of oncology appointments, second opinions, and treatment options. The doctors laid out the battle plan. Aggressive chemotherapy to shrink the tumor, followed by a mastectomy, then radiation. The whole process would take at least a year, maybe longer. The side effects would be brutal. The outcome was uncertain. I made a decision that felt as natural as breathing. My business could wait. My clients could find other consultants. My wife needed me, and nothing else mattered. I closed my consulting firm, referred my clients to competitors, and became Celeste's full-time caregiver and advocate. I drove her to every appointment, held her hand through every test, researched treatment options until my eyes burned from staring at medical journals on my laptop screen. I learned to speak fluent oncology, knew the difference between adriamycin and Taxotere, could discuss tumor markers and CA 27.29 levels with her doctors like I'd gone to medical school. The chemo started in May. I watched my vibrant, beautiful wife transform into someone I barely recognized. Her hair fell out in clumps that I'd find clogging the shower drain. Her skin turned gray and papery. She lost 30 pounds from her already slender frame, and her clothes hung on her like drapes on a scarecrow. But the worst part wasn't the physical changes. It was watching her spirit dim. Celeste had always been this unstoppable force, attacking every challenge head-on. Cancer humbled her in ways that broke my heart. Some days she couldn't get out of bed. Other days she'd cry for hours over something as simple as burning toast. The woman who used to run 5 miles every morning now got winded walking to the mailbox. I became everything she needed: nurse, chef, chauffeur, cheerleader, punching bag. I learned to give her anti-nausea shots when her hand shook too badly to hold the syringe. I cooked her specific meals based on whatever she could keep down that day. Usually bland soups and crackers, sometimes just ice chips. I held her head when she vomited, cleaned up when she couldn't make it to the bathroom in time, and pretended not to see her flinch when she caught her reflection in mirrors. The financial strain was crushing. My business income disappeared overnight, but the medical bills kept coming. Insurance covered most of the major treatments, but the out-of-pocket expenses added up fast. Prescription copays, parking fees at the hospital, special foods and supplements, the wig that made her feel slightly more like herself. I burned through our savings, then took out a second mortgage on the house. Friends and family offered help, but Celeste was proud. She didn't want people to see her weak, so our social circle gradually shrank to just us and her medical team. Isolation became another enemy we fought together. The mastacity happened in September, 8 months after her diagnosis. I'll never forget sitting in that surgical waiting room for 6 hours, watching other families come and go while I stayed frozen in the same uncomfortable chair, drinking terrible coffee and pretending to read magazines. When the surgeon finally came out to tell me everything had gone well, that they'd gotten clean margins, that the lymph nodes looked good, I broke down crying right there in front of everyone. Recovery from surgery was its own special hell. Celeste couldn't lift her arms above her shoulders for weeks. Simple tasks like shampooing her hair or putting on a shirt became team efforts. I helped her with exercises to regain mobility, stretching her arms inch by painful inch while she gritted her teeth and tears rolled down her cheeks. The reconstruction surgery came 3 months later, then another recovery period. More pain, more limitations, more careful navigation of her physical and emotional healing. I researched everything: which bras would be most comfortable, how to massage scar tissue, what positions would be least painful for sleeping. Through it all, I told myself this was what love meant, in sickness and in health, for better or worse. These weren't just wedding vows to me, they were a sacred contract. I'd signed up for all of it, the beautiful and the brutal. I believed we were fighting this battle together, that every sacrifice I made was an investment in our future, in the life we'd rebuild on the other side of this nightmare. Some nights, after Celeste finally fell asleep, I'd sit in my car in our driveway and allow myself 5 minutes to feel the weight of it all. The fear that she might not make it, the exhaustion that went bone deep, the loneliness of carrying everyone's hope while having nowhere to put my own despair. But then I'd look at our house, at the warm light spilling from our bedroom window, and remember why I was doing this. The woman sleeping inside was my wife, my partner, my best friend. She'd have done the same for me without question. Love wasn't just the easy moments, the Sunday morning pancakes and Friday night movies. Love was showing up when everything fell apart, when there was nothing glamorous or rewarding about it except the promise that you'd face whatever came next together. The radiation treatment started in February of the following year. 5 days a week for 6 weeks, precise beams of energy targeting any remaining cancer cells. Celeste's skin burned and peeled like she'd been lying in the sun for days. I became an expert in aloe vera application in loose cotton clothing. By March, almost exactly 1 year after that first terrible phone call, we got the words we'd been praying for: remission. Clean scans, normal blood work, cautious optimism from her oncology team. Celeste was cancer-free. I thought we'd won. I thought we'd beaten the disease and proven that our love was stronger than anything life could throw at us. I thought the hardest part was over. I was wrong. The celebration was quiet. After a year of hospitals and treatments, grand gestures felt out of place. We went to her favorite Thai restaurant, the first time Celeste had been able to eat spicy food in months, and toasted with water glasses because alcohol still made her nauseous.
She looked beautiful that night, her hair growing back in soft brown curls, color returning to her cheeks. When she smiled, really smiled, for the first time in what felt like forever, I thought we'd made it through the storm. The first few months of recovery were a delicate dance of rebuilding. Celeste was physically weak but mentally determined to reclaim her life. She started with short walks around the block, then longer ones. She began cooking again, simple meals at first, then the elaborate weekend projects she used to love. Her energy returned gradually, like water slowly filling a well. I tried to give her space to heal while still being available for whatever she needed. The hypervigilance of the cancer year was hard to shake. I found myself checking on her constantly, monitoring her mood, her appetite, her sleep patterns, like I was still her primary caregiver instead of her husband. The financial recovery was going to take longer. My consulting business was basically gone. Clients had moved on. Industry contacts had grown cold. I started taking freelance projects, whatever I could find, usually for half what I used to charge. We were drowning in medical debt despite the insurance coverage. Credit cards, home equity line, money borrowed from my parents that I wasn't sure we'd ever be able to repay.
But I didn't care about the money, not really. I figured we'd recover financially the same way Celeste was recovering physically, slowly, deliberately, together. I started networking again, reaching out to old colleagues, updating my portfolio. It would take time to rebuild what I'd lost, but it seemed like a fair trade for my wife's life. Celeste returned to work part-time in May, then full-time by August. Her company had held her position, and she slipped back into the creative director role like she'd never been gone. If anything, she seemed more focused, more driven than before. She talked about cancer being a wake-up call, about not taking anything for granted, about making every day count. I was proud of her resilience, her determination to not let the disease define her. But I started noticing small changes that made me uneasy. She worked later hours than before, took calls during dinner, brought projects home on weekends. When I suggested she might be pushing too hard, she'd remind me that we needed the money, that she had time to make up for. She signed up for a gym membership and threw herself into fitness with an intensity that worried me. Every morning at 5:30, she'd be out the door for yoga or spin class or personal training sessions. She said she needed to feel strong again, to rebuild what cancer had taken from her body. I understood that, but there was something almost desperate about it, like she was trying to outrun something I couldn't see. Our physical intimacy, which had been non-existent during treatment, remained complicated. The reconstruction surgery had changed her body in ways that took getting used to, for both of us. But more than the physical changes, there seemed to be an emotional distance that hadn't been there before. She'd pull away when I tried to hold her, make excuses when conversation drifted toward anything serious. When I brought it up, she said she needed time, that she was still figuring out who she was in this new body, this new life. I gave her space, because that's what you do when someone you love has been through trauma. I focused on rebuilding my career, taking whatever work I could find, slowly clawing our way back to financial stability. I figured the emotional reconnection would come with time, the same way her physical strength was returning. By fall, Celeste seemed like her old self in most ways. Her hair had grown back, she'd gained weight, her laugh was starting to sound genuine again. She was promoted to Senior Creative Director, a position she'd been working toward for years before the diagnosis. We celebrated at the same Thai restaurant where we'd toasted her remission, and for the first time in 18 months, I felt like we might actually be okay. That's when I started noticing Jake. Jake Morrison was the new account director at Celeste's firm, hired while she was out sick. 32 years old, single, one of those guys who looked like he'd stepped out of a fitness magazine. When Celeste mentioned him in passing, his creative ideas, his work ethic, his easy sense of humor, something in her voice made me pay attention. At first, it was just little things. She'd mentioned grabbing lunch with Jake, or staying late to work on a campaign with Jake, or how Jake had suggested this great new restaurant we should try. Jake became a regular part of her work stories in a way that other colleagues never had. Then came the night she didn't come home until after midnight. She said they'd been working on a big presentation, lost track of time, grabbed dinner to keep working. She seemed energized, almost giddy, in a way I hadn't seen since before the cancer. When I asked about the project, she was vague, distracted, already checking her phone for messages. I told myself I was being paranoid. Celeste had been through hell, and if working closely with a colleague made her feel vital and engaged again, that was a good thing. I'd spent a year watching her fight for her life. Wasn't I grateful that she was finally living it again? But the late nights became regular. Text messages during dinner that made her smile in ways that hurt to watch. Weekend emergency meetings that couldn't be explained in any detail. She started dressing differently for work, clothes that showed off her rebuilt figure, makeup applied with more care than she'd taken in years. The worst part was how alive she seemed. More alive than she'd been since before the diagnosis. Maybe more alive than she'd ever been with me. She had this energy, this glow, that made our quiet evenings at home feel flat by comparison. When she talked about work now, her whole face lit up. When she talked to me, she seemed distracted, like part of her was always somewhere else.
I started paying attention to details I'd been missing. The way she guarded her phone, taking it to the bathroom, sleeping with it face down on her nightstand. How she'd suddenly developed strong opinions about restaurants and movies and music that seemed to come from nowhere. The new perfume, the gym membership she used religiously, the way she'd started styling her hair differently. One night in November, I found myself doing something I never thought I'd do, going through her phone while she was in the shower. I felt sick about it even as I scrolled through her messages, looking for evidence of something I didn't want to confirm. I didn't find smoke and gun proof, but I found enough. Messages about meeting for drinks after work, inside jokes I wasn't part of, casual intimacy that felt like emotional infidelity, even if it wasn't yet physical. There was one exchange that made my blood freeze. "Jake, last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you." Celeste, "Me too, but we have to be careful." Jake, "I know, but Cel, what we have, this is real." Celeste, "I know, I just need more time to figure things out." I set the phone back exactly where I'd found it and sat on our bed, staring at the wall. The woman I'd spent a year nursing back to health, the woman I'd sacrificed everything for, was having an affair. Maybe not physical yet, but emotional infidelity that felt just as devastating. The shower was still running. In a few minutes, she'd come out wrapped in a towel I'd bought her during chemo when her old ones felt too rough against her tender skin. She'd kiss me goodnight the same way she had for the past few months, quick, perfunctory, like checking an item off a list. Then she'd lie next to me, probably texting Jake while I pretended to sleep. I wanted to confront her immediately, but something held me back. Maybe it was the year of caretaking that had trained me to put her needs first, or maybe I was just a coward. Instead, I decided to watch and wait, to gather more evidence before I destroyed what was left of our marriage. That decision would haunt me for the rest of my life. Over the next few weeks, the signs became impossible to ignore. Celeste was essentially living a double life, and she wasn't trying very hard to hide it anymore. She'd come home late with elaborate stories about client dinners and strategy sessions, but she glowed with the kind of satisfaction that had nothing to do with work accomplishments. I started having dreams about the cancer year. Not nightmares about her dying, but dreams about those quiet moments when it was just us against the world. Holding her hand in chemo chairs, helping her shower when she was too weak to stand alone. The way she'd look at me with such gratitude and love when I brought her soup she could actually keep down. In those dreams, we were a team. We were fighting together. The love felt pure and honest and mutual. I'd wake up next to a stranger who was planning her escape from our marriage while I slept. The cruelest part was how good she seemed. Healthier than she'd been in years, more confident, more beautiful. Cancer hadn't broken her. It had somehow freed her. And I was the one left behind, still living in the reality of sacrifice and commitment while she explored this new version of herself that apparently didn't include me. December brought the company Christmas party. Celeste spent hours getting ready, trying on different dresses, asking my opinion with the kind of excited nervousness she used to have for our anniversary dinners. She looked stunning, radiant in a way that made my chest ache. I wasn't invited to the party. Spouses weren't included this year. Budget constraints, she said. I sat at home with Pilot watching terrible holiday movies and wondering if she was dancing with Jake, if he was seeing her the way she looked when she left the house, if this was the night she'd finally cross whatever line she'd been walking. She came home at 3 in the morning, makeup smeared, hair disheveled, reeking of wine and something else I couldn't identify. She said she'd had too much to drink, that Sarah from accounting had driven her home, that she was sorry for waking me. I pretended to believe her, the same way I'd been pretending for months. The next morning, she was different. Quiet, distracted, but also decisive in a way that made my stomach clench. She made coffee and sat across from me at our kitchen table, the same table where she told me about finding a lump, where we'd planned her treatment schedule, where I'd helped her with physical therapy exercises. She said we needed to talk. I knew before she said a word. Maybe I'd known for months, but seeing her sitting there with that careful expression, hands wrapped around her coffee mug like armor, I finally understood that this conversation was going to end everything we'd built together. She started with an apology. She was sorry for how distant she'd been, sorry for making me feel like something was wrong, sorry for not being honest sooner. The words felt rehearsed, like she practiced this speech in front of Jake, maybe even asked him how to break up with the husband who'd saved her life. Then came the explanation. Cancer had changed her, made her realize how precious time was, how important it was to live authentically. She'd been grateful for everything I'd done during her illness, so grateful. But gratitude wasn't the same as love. Not the kind of love she deserved, the kind of love she'd found with someone else. She didn't say Jake's name at first, but she didn't need to. She talked about discovering parts of herself she'd forgotten existed, about feeling alive in ways she hadn't in years, about not wanting to waste the second chance cancer had given her by staying in a relationship that had become more about duty than desire. I listened without interrupting, watching this woman who'd shared my bed for 8 years, whose body I knew better than my own from helping her through treatment, explained why our marriage was over with the same clinical precision she'd once used to discuss tumor markers. When she finally said his name, Jake, it hit me like a physical blow. Not because I was surprised, but because hearing it made everything real. The late nights, the secret smiles, the way she'd started pulling away from me the moment she got strong enough to stand on her own, all of it had been leading to this moment. She said they tried to fight it, that neither of them had planned for this to happen. They'd connected over work projects, found themselves talking for hours about things that had nothing to do with campaigns or creative briefs. He made her feel seen in ways she'd forgotten were possible. He looked at her like she was beautiful, not like she was someone who needed to be protected and managed. The affair had been going on for 4 months. Not just emotional, they'd been sleeping together since October. In his apartment, in hotel rooms during fake business trips, probably in conference rooms at her office while I sat at home balancing our medical bills. She said she hadn't meant for it to happen this way, that she'd never wanted to hurt me. But Jake had asked her to leave me, to start fresh with him, and she'd realized she wanted that more than she wanted to keep pretending our marriage was something it wasn't. I finally spoke, my voice sounding strange and distant. "What about everything I did for you?" That's when her composure cracked, just slightly. She said she'd never asked me to give up my business, to become her full-time caregiver, to put my entire life on hold. I'd made those choices, and while she appreciated them, she couldn't stay married to me out of obligation. I needed a nurse during cancer, she said, her voice getting harder. But I need a partner during the rest of my life, someone who challenges me, who makes me excited about tomorrow. Someone who sees me as a woman, not as a patient who needs to be managed. The words were designed to wound, and they did their job perfectly. Every sacrifice I'd made, every night I'd held her while she cried, every time I'd chosen her needs over my own, all of it reduced to the duties of a hired caregiver, not the actions of a devoted husband. I asked if she'd ever loved me, really loved me, or if I'd just been convenient until someone better came along. She said she'd loved the idea of me, the stability I represented, the future we'd planned together. But cancer had taught her the difference between settling for safe and fighting for extraordinary. Jake made her feel extraordinary. The practical details came next. She wanted to keep the house. She could afford the mortgage now with her promotion, and I'd been behind on payments anyway since my business collapsed. She'd buy out my half of the equity, such as it was after the second mortgage and home equity loan. She'd take responsibility for her medical debt, but everything else we'd split. She'd already talked to a lawyer, already had papers drawn up, already planned her exit strategy while I'd been planning our recovery. I asked when she was leaving. "Today," she said. "Jake's helping me move my things this afternoon." That's when I realized why she'd picked this Saturday morning for her confession. I'd been wondering why she'd finally decided to be honest, what had changed overnight. She needed me out of the house for a few hours so her boyfriend could help her pack up our life together without the awkwardness of facing me. She suggested I visit my parents, maybe take Pilot to the dog park, just give them some space to get her essential items. She'd come back for the rest later when I wasn't around.
I sat there staring at this stranger who looked like my wife, trying to process the magnitude of her betrayal. She'd planned every detail of her escape while lying next to me each night. She'd been making lists of what to take and what to leave behind, while I was researching business loans to restart my career. She'd been consulting lawyers and scheduling moving help, while I was making dinner reservations for our anniversary. The clinical efficiency of it was almost impressive. She'd waited until she was completely recovered, financially secure, and had somewhere to go before burning down our marriage. She'd used the time I thought we were rebuilding to plan her exit strategy. I asked the question that had been burning in my chest. Did any of it matter? The year I spent taking care of you, fighting for you, believing in us? She was quiet for a long moment, and for the first time that morning, she looked genuinely sad. "It mattered," she said finally. "But Marcus, you can't save someone's life and then expect them to owe you theirs." That sentence broke something fundamental in me. Not just my heart, but my understanding of what love meant, what marriage was supposed to be, what happens when you give everything you have to someone who decides it wasn't what they wanted after all. I left the house that afternoon and drove aimlessly through Portland, ending up at Mount Tabor, where Celeste and I used to hike on Sundays. I sat in my car watching other couples walk the trails we'd explored together, thinking about the man I'd been before cancer entered our lives. That man had been confident, successful, optimistic about the future. He'd believed that love was about showing up, about choosing each other every day, about building something stronger than whatever challenges life threw at you. The man sitting in that parking lot was none of those things. He was financially ruined, professionally adrift, and emotionally shattered. Worse than that, he was naive. He'd believed that sacrifice and devotion were investments in a shared future, not down payments on abandonment. When I finally came home that evening, half of our life was gone. Her clothes, her books, the artwork we'd chosen together, even some of the furniture. The house felt hollow, like a stage set after the actors had left. There was a note on the kitchen table, written in the same handwriting that used to leave me love notes in my lunch during the chemo months.
"Marcus, I know this is painful, but I hope someday you'll understand that I'm setting us both free. You deserve someone who chooses you because they want to, not because they have to. Thank you for everything you did for me. I will never forget your kindness." See, kindness. That's what she called it. A year of devotion reduced to kindness. I crumpled the note and threw it away, then immediately retrieved it and smoothed it out. I don't know why. Maybe because it was the last thing she'd ever write to me, or maybe because I needed evidence that this had actually happened, that I hadn't imagined the entire conversation. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Celeste married Jake 3 weeks after the papers were signed. I know because mutual friends felt obligated to tell me. The same friends who'd sent cards and flowers during her treatment, who'd praised me for being such a devoted husband, who now didn't know how to act around me at social gatherings. The wedding was small, they said, just family and close friends. Very tasteful, very elegant. Celeste looked radiant. Jake seemed like a good guy, really. They were clearly happy together. I stopped going to parties where I might hear updates about their perfect new life. The financial recovery took 3 years. I rebuilt my consulting business slowly, deliberately, learning to trust clients again, learning to trust my own judgment. The emotional recovery is still ongoing, and maybe always will be. I date sometimes now, but it's complicated. How do you explain to someone new that your marriage ended not because you were a bad husband, but because you were too good of one? How do you trust that love means anything more than temporary convenience when you've seen how quickly gratitude can turn to resentment? I've learned to be grateful for the experience in ways I never expected. Cancer taught me what I was capable of when someone I loved needed me. The divorce taught me what I was capable of when that love wasn't returned. Both lessons were valuable, even though one nearly destroyed me. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd confronted Celeste when I first suspected the affair, if I'd fought for our marriage instead of letting her plan her escape. But I think I know the answer. She'd made her choice months before she told me about it. I was just the last person to find out. The house sold last year. I used my half of the proceeds to buy a small condo near the river, a place with no history, no ghosts of conversations that ended everything.
Pilot and I have settled into a routine that doesn't include waiting for someone to come home, doesn't include wondering if tonight will be the night everything changes again. I'm not bitter anymore, not most days. Celeste was right about one thing. I did deserve someone who chooses me because they want to, not because they owe me something. The cruel irony is that I thought she was that person. I thought choosing each other through the hardest year of our lives meant something. I thought love was what you did when everything fell apart, not what you abandoned when it got inconvenient. But maybe that's the real lesson here. Love isn't a transaction. Sacrifice doesn't guarantee loyalty. Sometimes you can give someone everything you have and still lose them, not because you didn't do enough, but because what you did changed who they needed you to be. Celeste needed a nurse during cancer, and I became one. She needed a caregiver during recovery, and I provided that too. But when she was ready to be a woman again instead of a patient, she needed someone who'd never seen her sick, never seen her weak, never known her as anything other than the vital, beautiful, complicated person she was becoming. I couldn't be that person for her because I'd been too many other things first. If you've made it this far, I'd love to hear from you what moment in your life made you see someone for who they truly were. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Reddit Whispers, where the real stories get told.